I'm Damien Fowler.
And I'm Eileen Sliffring.
And welcome to this edition of The Current Podcast.
This week, we're delighted to talk with Mark Penn, the chairman and CEO of Stagwell.
Well, where to start summing up Mark Penn's remarkable career? First, as a political pollster who's advised names like Bill and Hillary Clinton and Tony Blair. Later, he became chief strategist for Microsoft before founding Stagwell, a digital-first marketing and communications group.
Mark's political background no doubt brings a much-needed perspective to marketing. He argues that in today's real-time, data-driven world, brands must have a constant finger on the pulse of the American consumer.
We start by asking him how these two worlds, politics and marketing, have always been bound together. Mark, it's no secret that you've covered the waterfront from being a political strategist to a pollster to a businessman and author. Can you walk us through a little bit about how you went from polling to politics to media? That's a big question, right?
Yes, I'm still trying to answer that question myself. How did I get here?
Yeah.
I kind of re-strategize myself like every decade or so. And I say, well, okay, what is it that I really want to do? And so I kind of started actually out as I was going to be a lawyer. And then I detoured from law to polling. And then I was going to be a pollster working for the president, and I got to do that. So then I kind of detoured from there. And then at a certain point, and then I loved technology, so I was then kind of went to Microsoft and became chief strategy officer. And then I had this idea to say, well, how could I take all my experiences in polling and campaigns and running Burson Marsteller, and I ran Microsoft's advertising too. And I said, you know what? I could form a better holding company because it could be more digital first. Mm-hmm. It could be more freed from the legacy assets. It could be more innovative. And so I did exactly that.
Yeah. Doing a little research on your background, it seems like your curiosity seems to have served you very well throughout life. Is that part of the DNA of what drives you? Or what motivates you to keep going?
Well, you have to do what you're interested in. I always think it's so funny. My partner and I were going to be corporate lawyers. And then we decided, you know what, we like this polling thing. We have impact on campaigns and society. And we thought, we're giving up this cushy life as corporate lawyers. And we did a lot better doing polling than we ever would have done as corporate lawyers. So what I always tell people is follow your passion. Don't worry so much. If you do something really interesting, really well, you'll figure out how to manage the reward side of things. And that's much better than doing something you don't really like that you somehow think is going to be rewarding.
Now, Stagwell, as you mentioned, offers this big marketing network that's tech-driven. As a leader in digital, how have you seen the two areas move together? The idea of digital marketing, performance, and creative. How do those two things converge?
Well, I think they have to work together. I think that to the extent that you're creating a digital experience, that is a creative activity. That everyone, remember, those of us who are not born digital think of how we create a TV spot first. Those who are born digital don't think in that way. They think in how they're going to create a digital experience first, right? And that takes the same kind of creativity, if not more so, right? Because TV spots eventually had they had rules, right? Mm-hmm. And they had a boundary, and they were 30 seconds, and you can be like, it's actually more of an interesting open canvas when it comes to digital creation.
What would you say is one thing every brand or media buyer should be thinking about today?
Every media buyer, I think today, is just thinking about how they find the right place for their brand. I mean, I think it's kind of the basic of who's your real target audience and how are you going to find that audience. And I think they just have to be open-minded that there are so many new ways to reach an audience that they have to spread their wings a little bit, right? I mean, I think we went from it was just TV to it was just TV and Google and Facebook to now it's Google and Facebook and TikTok and retail marketing and so many other things. And I think they just have to be open to experimenting to find where their target audience really is.
Now, it's no secret that the publishing industry is under a lot of pressure today. And Stagwell recently published a study called the News Advertising Study with findings that showcase that it's safe for brands to advertise next to news, regardless of the topic, and that ads next to those, even like controversial topics, perform just as effectively as those within more like positive news environments, maybe like sports or entertainment. Now, in your op-ed for The Current, you wrote that brands think there is less downside in those positive environments, but the opposite is true too. There is less upside. Can you tell us what you mean, and why should advertisers care about these findings?
Well, I think that I discovered this when I did the budgeting at Microsoft, a lot of companies have a huge hole in their media buy, and that hole is news. That they will be advertising in sports, and they will be advertising in entertainment, and they will be blacking out news, or they will be subscribing to a service that in effect blocks them out. And what maybe started out as some good idea, that the ad for Boeing shouldn't appear next to a plane crash, really somehow devolved into something affecting 25% of news articles, seriously demonetizing journalism, and is having unintended consequences far beyond that. And brand safety, seriously? I mean, I've yet to see some brand lying in the curb because their advertisement appeared in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. It's a ludicrous notion to be blacking out legitimate journalistic publications for, quote, brand safety.
In general, the business model for news journalism is sort of evolving and changing. What else do you think can advertisers and publishers do to work together to make sure that journalism is thriving, even as newsrooms shutter?
Well, I think that there has to be a little bit of re-education here with the CMOs and the media buyers. I think they're afraid that somehow they're going to trigger some backlash against their company. Yeah, certain things have triggered a backlash. But to go back to, I've never known that backlash to come from advertising in one of the major publications. And so consequently, I think that they can reduce some of their fear levels. And then also they have to understand that news consumers, right, and about 25% of the country, maybe 23% of the country are what I classify as news junkies, right, who go in and get updated on the news 5 times a day. That is a great engaged audience. They read stuff, okay? That means they're more likely actually to kind of absorb your advertisement than someone who doesn't read stuff. And so I think they really have to rethink how some of their media planning and the audiences they're targeting, and get out there and experiment with news. Because I think for the social problem here is that it's demonetizing news and putting journalists out of work. But just be greedy. Just think about your brand. I think it will benefit.
They shouldn't be on the back foot so much. Speaking of news, of course, this year is a presidential election year in the US and elections all around the world. What do you think are the top channels in today's media landscape for this year's US presidential election?
Well, I think that's kind of interesting. Look, most campaigns spend most money on TV, right? So, but as I tell commercial advertisers, if you have your customers in Ohio, well, Ohio is less of a swing state than it was, but let's say Arizona or Nevada or even Virginia, good luck. Good luck buying media, in the last few months here, because it is going to be jammed because there's more money than ever in politics, right? And so then politics is then going to go over to social media, right? And I think spend a lot of money on social media, all being hard. And you're going to find, just from an age cohort, you're going to find people on X are older and people on TikTok are younger, and you have to understand your audience and the medium. So it's interesting. I came from a lot of old school TV advertising. I've yet to see how people as effectively drive a message, right, on social media. I think they've got to do more work. As I always say, the best digital ads in either politics or commercial have yet to be invented.
To that effort, especially when connecting with Gen Zers, do you think technology will play more of a role? Do we see candidates still sticking true to social media, or are there other channels you think they're playing even more in this year?
Well, it's interesting that, what does Trump really do? Trump does events. So his event strategy is then geared to create content that then gets distributed primarily through social media, right? And so it's very interesting because it's almost we look here, we're at something called Sport Beach, and so events are back. And events aren't a substitute for the media. They generate the content that you really need. That's because people want content that's fresh, right? And they want to feel that they're in the moment, right? They don't want something that's old and that's canned. And so I think that's really, really important. But we are seeing, look, we know that about 70% of budgets now have really gone online, and that is, back when I was at Microsoft a decade ago, it was probably 2%. So that has gone beyond anybody's expectations. Of course, that was one of the reasons that I founded Stagwell, because we saw that and we wanted to be ahead of that curve. And of course, that's one of the things that we work together closely with the trade desk on.
Now, personal politics aside, what advice would you share with Biden's team and Trump's team? Where's the gap in each of their campaigns as it stands?
Well, but I would really tell both of them the same thing. I try to explain to people the math of swing voting, that if an election is 5-5 and it switches, one person switches, it becomes 6-4. Now, it takes two people in turnout to equal one person who switches. So getting switchers is really the most powerful thing in politics. And getting switchers means appealing to people who don't agree with you, right? And so what I would say is get out of the politics of the base, get into the politics of switchers, reach out to the people who don't agree with you, try to find compromises in policy that brings them in, and whoever does that most successfully will not only win, but will win in a landslide. And if alternatively they appeal only to their base, they may win, they may lose, but they will not have changed the 50-50 nature of the country.
Now, you're known as a sage advisor. What's the best advice you've ever received?
Yeah. Well, the best advice I ever received was at an elevator in which a guy told me he was a stock analyst, and he said, buy Amazon. He said, sell every other stock you have and buy Amazon, because they will be the future of retailing. And this was like when Amazon was a peanut. I, of course, thought the guy was a nutcase. And so I did not follow that advice. I would say that though, seriously, I've worked for a lot of incredible people, and I always try to pick up kind of what they do best, right? And I worked with President Clinton, and President Clinton was just amazing at synthesis. You would throw incredibly complex things at him, and he would fit them all into pieces. Or I worked, with Steve Ballmer, who's a core investor, and I just thought he was like, I didn't understand how he had 110,000 people and went home at 5:30. And how his time management was so radically different than mine. So I've always tried to pick up things from whomever I worked with, and to see what's the special thing, some of the special things that really work well.
It's fascinating. Now, Stagwell is no stranger to growth or acquisitions. And what does the future hold for Stagwell?
Well, I always explain we started Stagwell 8 years ago, at zero. We're about $2.5 billion in revenue now. We continue to expand out globally and also building a series of tech products. I feel that we're a teenager now. We were a baby 2 or 3 years ago, and we're really now coming on as a challenger network. And we're going to continue to challenge, but we think we have a lot of growth ahead of us.
Now, there's a lot of things affecting the industry, a lot of major topics that are being discussed nonstop. What is your prediction for the end of 2024 and into 2025?
Look, I think this is going to be a good year for marketing. There's going to be $12 billion spent on politics, so that's always helpful. And I think we have several companies that are in the political space. I think that advertising is growing generally. I think tech companies have a lot of work to do in terms of the competition now that's occurring on who's going to really dominate in AI, if anybody, or how are people going to have different flavors of AI. So I think there's a lot of exciting stuff going on. I think 23 was a year I couldn't wait for it to finish. It was not the year that we were hoping for, but 24, sitting here in mid-year is looking good.
And that's it for this edition of The Current Podcast. We'll be back next week, so stay tuned.
The Current Podcast's theme is by Love and Caliber. The Current team includes Kat Fessy and Sydney Cairns.
And remember,
a lot of companies have a huge hole in their media buy, and that hole is news.
I'm Damien.
And I'm Elise.
And we'll see you next time. And if you like what you hear, please subscribe and leave us a review. Also, tune into our other podcast, The Current Report.